Three men closed the hallway around Claire Bennett like a boardroom door no one else was allowed to open. She was worth more than most city blocks. Yet in that narrow passage beside the wine cabinet, money could not buy her one clear step toward freedom. At table 12, a quiet single dad heard nothing at first but his daughter's fork tapping a birthday plate. Then he saw the folded document, the blocked exit, and the practiced smiles of men who thought fear could be dressed up as business. Nobody in the restaurant knew Ethan Walker had spent years reading danger before it raised its voice. And nobody expected the tired father in the faded work jacket to become the reason the entire room would fall silent. The Meridian Room sat on the 42nd floor above downtown Chicago, wrapped in glass, polished walnut, and soft golden light that made every table look more expensive than the meal placed upon it. Outside, Lake Michigan was a dark sheet of winter steel, and the city glowed below in rivers of headlights and office windows. Inside, waiters moved with quiet precision, couples murmured over steak and wine, and executives laughed in voices trained never to sound uncertain. Ethan Walker did not belong to that world, or at least that was what most eyes would have decided if they had noticed him at all. His boots were clean but worn at the edges. His hands carried the faint scent of pine boards, motor oil, and cold rain. Across from him sat Lily, 8 years old, white ribbon in her hair, chin lifted with the solemn pride of a child trying to make a small celebration feel grand. There was no party crowd, no pile of presents, no magician, no balloons. Just a chocolate cupcake with 2 thin candles, a paper crown from the hostess, and a father who had worked 3 late shifts so his little girl could eat somewhere with cloth napkins and a view of the skyline. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Ethan said. "Can I wish for 2 things?" Lily whispered. "One official wish," he said. "One secret one." She smiled, closed her eyes, and held her breath as if the whole universe had leaned close to listen. Ethan watched her instead of the candle flames, because since her mother passed, Lily's joy had become the only proof he needed that grace could still visit ordinary people. Then the sound changed. Not loudly, not enough for the room to turn. It was the small break in the rhythm of a place that sold comfort to people who could afford not to worry. A chair scraped near the private hallway. A woman's voice lowered into something controlled. A man answered with a laugh too smooth to be kind. Ethan's eyes moved past Lily's shoulder. Claire Bennett stood near the wine cabinet in an ivory coat, her blonde hair pinned neatly, her posture straight enough to fool anyone not paying attention. 3 men surrounded her without touching her, each one leaving just enough space to pretend she could walk away. One held a folder. One checked his watch. One stood near the only open path back to the dining room. "Claire," the man with the folder said softly, "sign it tonight, and tomorrow can still be clean." She looked at the page, then at the doorway beyond them. "Move aside, Grant. Don't make this dramatic." "You already did." Ethan set down his water glass. Lily followed his gaze, and her birthday smile slowly faded. "Daddy," she asked, barely louder than a breath, "why does that lady look scared?" Ethan did not stand yet. He only looked once more, carefully, the way a man looks when he is praying he is wrong and already knows he is not. Ethan had learned long ago that panic usually arrived wearing somebody else's confidence. It was in the careful angle of Grant Holloway's shoulders, in the way Nolan Price kept the folder pressed flat against his chest, in the quiet placement of Derek Sloan near the corridor as if the marble floor itself belonged to him. None of them shouted. That was what made it worse. Men like that knew how to make pressure sound like advice, how to turn a threat into a sentence polite enough for witnesses to ignore. Claire Bennett kept her chin lifted, yet her fingers had tightened around the strap of her ivory handbag until the knuckles showed pale beneath the restaurant light. She was breathtaking in the way winter can be breathtaking, composed, luminous, distant, and carrying a cold no one asked about. To the people dining nearby, she looked like power wrapped in elegance, a woman with a name printed on buildings and charity plaques. To Ethan, she looked like someone standing 3 feet from a door she was not being allowed to use. "This document protects everyone," Nolan said, his voice soft as folded linen. "It protects the company, the board, your family name." Claire looked at him without blinking. "It protects thieves." Grant smiled as though she had complimented him. "Careful. Words like that travel fast." Derek glanced toward the dining room, not at anyone in particular, but at everyone at once. It was a trained glance, the kind meant to remind people that minding their own business could feel safer than doing the right thing. Ethan felt Lily's small hand find his under the table. She did not squeeze hard. She did not need to. Her questions still hovered between them, innocent and terrible, because children often recognize fear before adults decide whether it is convenient to see. Ethan leaned closer to her. "Keep eating your cupcake, sweetheart. Are you going to help her?" Lily asked. The candles had gone out, leaving two thin curls of smoke rising from the frosting. Ethan looked at those tiny gray ribbons and remembered another room, another evening, another person who had looked toward a doorway while powerful men explained why leaving was not an option. He had promised himself after Laura died that he would give Lily a quieter life than the one he once lived. No more midnight calls. No more sealed files. No more rooms where every smile had to be measured. He had traded a government badge for a toolbox, dress shoes for work boots, a guarded apartment for a rented duplex 8 miles from the river. He did not regret it. Quiet had saved him. Fatherhood had remade him. But dignity was not the same as disappearance, and peace was not the same as looking away. At the hallway, Claire tried to step around Derek. He shifted just enough to remain in her path, still smiling, still careful, still pretending nothing had happened. "Please do not embarrass yourself," Grant murmured. Claire's voice lowered. "Get out of my way." Nolan opened the folder and placed a silver pin across the top page. One signature, and this ends before breakfast. The room seemed to soften around the edges. Forks touched plates. Glasses chimed. A waiter slowed, noticed, then looked down because training had taught him not to disturb expensive problems. Ethan removed the napkin from his lap and folded it once, slowly, with a calm that did not belong to hesitation. Lily watched him with wide eyes. "Daddy." He smiled at her, and for a moment the tired lines around his eyes turned gentle again. "Stay in your seat. Count the windows for me. There are a lot. Then take your time." He stood. The chair made a low sound against the hardwood, not loud, not dramatic, but clean enough to cut through the polished air. At first only Lily noticed. Then a woman at the next table paused with her wineglass halfway lifted. Then Grant Holloway turned his head, irritated before he even understood why. Ethan stepped away from table 12, shoulders relaxed, hands open, face calm. He did not move like a man looking for attention. He moved like a father crossing a street with a child behind him, certain of the traffic, certain of the danger, and certain that somebody had to go first. Ethan stopped a respectful distance from the hallway, close enough to be heard, far enough to make it clear he had not come to crowd anyone. That was the first thing Claire noticed. He did not rush into her space like a rescuer looking for applause. He stood where the light from the dining room met the darker passage, his faded jacket still damp at the shoulders, his expression steady, his hands resting open at his sides. Grant Holloway looked him up and down, taking inventory in half a second and finding nothing he considered valuable. "Can we help you?" Grant asked. Ethan glanced at Claire, not long enough to embarrass her, only long enough to offer a choice. "Ma'am, are you able to leave?" Claire's lips parted, but before she could answer, Nolan gave a small laugh. "This is a private matter." "Then let her walk into the private room," Ethan said. Derek shifted his weight. "Sir, go back to your table." "I will." Ethan's voice stayed low. "After you stop blocking her exit." It was such a simple sentence that the men almost missed its weight. No accusation. No performance. Just truth placed gently on the floor where everyone could see it. The nearby conversations began to thin. A couple by the window stopped whispering. A waiter holding a tray of water glasses slowed beside a column. At table 12, Lily counted windows under her breath, but her eyes kept finding her father. Claire Bennett had faced senators, investors, television hosts, and boardrooms where every handshake carried a hidden blade. Yet something about this ordinary man's calm made the air around her change. Not safer exactly, not yet, but less lonely. Grant stepped forward with a polished smile. "Mister, you have no idea who you are interrupting." Ethan nodded once. "I probably do not." "Then be smart." "I am trying to be decent." Nolan closed the folder with a soft tap. Decent men do not insert themselves into corporate negotiations. Ethan looked at the pen resting across the pages. Corporate negotiations usually do not happen in a hallway with one person trapped near a wall. That made Claire look down for the first time, not in shame, but in recognition. He had named it. The thing they had dressed in legal language, the thing they had made small enough to hide in a restaurant, had finally been given its proper shape. Derek's jaw tightened. You are making a mistake. Ethan turned to him. Maybe. He let the word settle. But not the one you were hoping for. The hush widened. Someone lowered a menu. Someone else put away a phone, not out of disinterest, but out of respect for what the room had become. Claire's beautiful face remained composed, but her eyes had changed from guarded blue glass to something alive, alert, almost astonished. She took a single step toward the dining room. Derek moved only an inch, but it was enough. Ethan saw it. Claire saw it. Now half the restaurant saw it too. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not point. He simply said, "There it is." Grant's smile disappeared. Nolan swallowed. Claire drew herself taller, the ivory coat falling clean along her shoulders like armor remembered. "Derek," she said, each word precise, "move." For a moment, he did not. Then Ethan looked at him with the quiet sadness of a man who had seen pride ruin better people than this. "You heard her." And in that narrow strip of silence between command and consequence, the first crack appeared in the wall they had built around her. Derek finally moved, but only enough to let Claire step into the open edge of the dining room, not enough to surrender the ground he thought he owned. The change was small, yet every honest person in that elegant room felt it. A woman who had been cornered now had air beside her. A choice had returned. Through the glass walls, Chicago glittered below like a promise written in gold and white, and far beyond the towers, Lake Michigan held the last silver traces of moonlight against the dark. Claire took one breath, slow and careful, the kind a person takes when she has been brave longer than anyone knows. Grant Holloway adjusted his cuff links and recovered his smile, but it came back thinner now. "Claire, this is becoming unnecessary." "It became unnecessary when you followed me out of the private room," she said. Nolan lifted the folder again, trying to make paper look powerful. "The emergency voting transfer is standard procedure under reputational risk." Ethan looked at the page from where he stood. "Standard for whom?" Nolan's eyes sharpened. "For people who understand corporate law." Ethan did not answer right away. A quiet man knows the worth of silence. He also knows when silence has been used as a weapon against someone else. The manager, a nervous man in a charcoal suit, appeared near the host's stand and paused, caught between the wealth of his guests and the responsibility of his house. A pianist near the lounge softened his playing until the melody became almost prayerful. Lily, still at table 12, had stopped counting windows and was watching Claire with the deep concern of a child who could not understand why adults made kindness so difficult. Claire saw the girl then, saw the cupcake with the melted candles, saw the father who had left his own small celebration to protect a stranger's right to walk away. Something in her expression trembled, not weakness, not surrender, but recognition. Years of boardrooms had taught her to expect ambition. Years of wealth had taught her to distrust sudden help. Yet Ethan had asked for nothing. Not her name, not her gratitude, not even her attention. "Who are you?" Claire asked softly. Grant answered for him with a scoff. "Nobody relevant." Ethan looked at Claire, not at Grant. "Ethan Walker." "And why are you here, Mr. Walker?" "My daughter turned 8 last week." Lily sat straighter when she heard herself mentioned, her little paper crown tilted to one side beneath the chandelier glow. Claire's eyes softened for half a second, and that half-second made her look less like a billionaire and more like a tired human being who had almost forgotten what tenderness looked like. Nolan cleared his throat. "This sentimental interruption does not alter the fact that Miss Bennett has obligations." Ethan turned his attention back to the folder. Obligations signed under pressure are not obligations. They are evidence. The sentence landed gently, but it changed the temperature of the room. Nolan's polished confidence slipped at the edge. Grant went still. Derek studied Ethan more closely now, no longer seeing a tired father in a work jacket, but a man whose calm had structure behind it. Ethan nodded toward the paper. 14B, if I heard you correctly. Temporary authority, emergency discretion, press containment, board shield. Nice language. Nolan blinked once. Ethan continued, but if she signs while her exit is obstructed, with witnesses present, after verbally asking to leave, your clean document becomes a dirty story. The piano stopped. Not dramatically, just one final note fading into the warm air above the marble floor. Claire looked at Ethan as if a locked door had opened somewhere she could not see. Grant whispered, "You should walk away." Ethan's face remained peaceful. That is exactly what she asked to do. And for the first time that night, the three men had no quick answer. Grant Holloway looked at Nolan Price as if the lawyer had misplaced a weapon made of ink, and Nolan looked back as if the paper in his hand had suddenly become too heavy to hold. For a few seconds, the Meridian Room breathed around them in polished silence. Crystal lights shimmered above the tables. The skyline pressed close against the glass. Silverware rested untouched beside white plates, and every person who had pretended not to notice now understood that something important had been happening in plain sight. Claire Bennett stood beneath the amber wall lamp with her ivory coat open at the collar, her blonde hair smooth except for one loose strand near her cheek, her beauty no longer distant but painfully human. She was not embarrassed by being helped. She was stunned by how gently it had been done. Ethan Walker had not humiliated her to save her. He had simply returned the truth to the room and let it stand taller than fear. "You studied law?" Nolan asked, trying to sound amused, but his voice had lost its shine. Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was watching from table 12 with both hands folded under her chin. "I studied people who use law to corner others." Grant gave a dry little laugh. "That is a clever line. It is an old lesson." "From where?" Ethan did not answer. Some histories are not secrets because they are shameful. Some are quiet because they cost too much to explain. Derek Sloan kept staring at him, and the longer he stared, the less certain his face became. He had seen that posture before, the still shoulders, the measured breathing, the eyes that did not wander even when the room tried to pull them away. Then he remembered a photograph in an old federal security briefing, a man standing beside a courthouse entrance in a Navy suit, half turned from the camera, guiding a witness through a swarm of reporters without once losing calm. Derek's mouth parted slightly. "Walker," he said. Ethan looked at him. Derek. The use of his first name was soft, but it struck harder than volume ever could. Derek blinked. "You were with the witness protection detail in the Mercer investigation." Grant's face changed. Nolan's folder lowered another inch. Claire looked from Derek to Ethan, and her eyes widened with a question she did not speak. The Mercer investigation had broken open a national financial fraud case 12 years earlier. It had taken down men who bought silence as casually as dinner, men whose signatures had ruined pensions, charities, farms, and family businesses from Illinois to Texas. Claire had been young then, still building her company, but she remembered the headlines. She remembered the name of the protected witness who survived long enough to testify, because one quiet federal contractor had refused to be frightened by influence. Ethan Walker, the father in the worn jacket, the man from table 12. Nolan tried to recover. "That history has no bearing on this discussion." Ethan turned to him. "It has every bearing. I know coercion when I see it. I know staged urgency. I know a document designed to look voluntary after the pressure has done its work." Grant stepped closer to the edge of the hallway, but stopped before crossing into Ethan's space. The old arrogance was still there, but it had lost its crown. "You are interfering in a matter worth hundreds of millions of dollars." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then you should have handled it with more integrity." The words did not shake the chandeliers. They did not need to. Truth rarely needs thunder when a room is finally willing to listen. Claire reached for the folder, and Nolan hesitated before handing it over. She removed the silver pen from the top page and placed it on the nearest service tray, as if setting down something unclean. "I am not signing this tonight," she said. Grant whispered, "You will regret that." Claire lifted her eyes to his. "No, I think I would have regretted signing it." Behind her, the manager found his courage and approached with his phone already in his hand. "Miss Bennett, would you like me to contact building security or the Chicago Police Department?" Claire looked at Ethan. Ethan did not tell her what to do. He only stepped slightly aside, giving her the full width of the hallway, the full dignity of choice. That small movement said more than any speech could have said. Claire turned back to the manager. "Please contact both and ask them to preserve the security footage from this floor." Nolan went pale. Grant stopped smiling altogether. Derek looked down, not defeated by force, but corrected by memory, by conscience, by the sight of a single father who had brought no badge, no title, and no threat into the room. Only the kind of quiet courage that makes false power feel suddenly small. The manager spoke quietly into his phone, and the sound of his voice seemed to give the room permission to breathe again. No one returned fully to dinner. They lifted glasses and touched napkins and pretended to study dessert menus, but their attention remained fixed on the hallway where three expensive men had discovered that polish is not the same as honor. Grant Holloway stood with his jaw set. Nolan Price held the folder against his side, and Derek Sloan looked toward the windows as if the city lights might offer him a place to hide from his own choices. Claire Bennett did not move closer to Ethan. She did not need to. For the first time that night, she stood in open space, and open space can feel like holy ground when someone else has tried to take it from you. "You planned this for tonight," she said to Grant. Her voice was calm, but beneath it lived years of board meetings, quiet betrayals, and every smile she had endured from men who confused her grace with weakness. Grant adjusted his tie. "I plan to protect the company. You plan to protect yourself." Nolan stepped in quickly. "Miss Bennett, I strongly advise you not to make public accusations in a crowded establishment." Ethan looked at Nolan. "That is good advice. You should follow it too." A small murmur moved through the diners. Not laughter exactly, but release. Truth had a way of unclenching people. Claire opened the folder and began reading the first page under the warm wall light. Her eyes moved fast, sharp and practiced, but when she reached the paragraph Ethan had named, her breath paused. There it was, dressed in careful language, a temporary authority transfer triggered by vague reputational concerns, broad enough to move voting control, narrow enough to hide inside a crisis. She had seen hostile tactics before, but never from people who had sat at her own table, accepted her trust, and toasted her success. "You used my father's foundation as leverage," she whispered. Grant said nothing. That silence answered more honestly than he could. Claire closed the folder. Her beautiful face did not break. It clarified. Some people fall apart when betrayal arrives. Others become painfully still, as if the soul has stepped back to keep its dignity clean. Ethan recognized that stillness. He had seen it in witnesses after the truth finally proved what they had survived. He turned slightly toward table 12. Lily was still sitting where he had asked her to stay, but the cupcake remained untouched now, the frosting softened under the chandelier glow. Her paper crown had slipped lower, and she was trying very hard to be brave in a room full of adult sorrow. Ethan's expression changed when he saw her. The protector faded. The father returned. "Excuse me," he said softly. Claire looked at him, surprised. Ethan gave her a small nod, then walked back to his daughter. He did not wait for applause, and none came, because applause would have made the moment smaller. He sat down, picked up the plastic knife, and cut the cupcake in half with the same care he had used to dismantle Nolan's confidence. "Did I count enough windows?" Lily asked. Ethan smiled. "More than enough." "Is she safe now?" He looked across the room. Claire had the folder in her hands, the manager beside her, and several witnesses now willing to stand where they had once only watched. "Safer," he said. "Sometimes that is where justice begins." Lily pushed the larger half of the cupcake toward him. "You can have this part. Birthday girls get the bigger piece. Heroes get some too." Ethan lowered his eyes, and for a moment the city beyond the glass blurred into light. "I am not a hero, sweetheart." Lily tilted her head. "Then why did everybody get quiet when you stood up?" Before Ethan could answer, Claire Bennett approached their table. She moved slowly, not like a billionaire entering a room, but like a person approaching a small chapel after a storm. The ivory coat caught the gold from the ceiling. Her eyes were bright, controlled, grateful, and wounded all at once. She stopped beside table 12, looked first at Lily, then at Ethan. "I interrupted a birthday," she said. Lily shook her head. "Those men did." Claire's lips softened into the first real smile Ethan had seen from her. "You are very wise." Lily glanced at her father. "He says wisdom means telling the truth without being mean." Claire looked at Ethan then, and the restaurant around them seemed to fade into the quiet space between two people who had both learned how heavy a life can become. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I do not know how to thank you." Ethan picked up the fallen paper crown and straightened it gently on Lily's head. "You do not have to thank me. Just make sure they do not do this to anyone else." Claire held the folder closer. "They will not." And in her voice, there was no revenge, no pride, no performance. Only the firm, clean sound of a woman choosing truth while a quiet father and his little girl watched from a table marked with the number 12. Two building officers arrived first, not with noise, but with the careful steps of men who understood that wealth could make trouble look respectable. Behind them came a uniformed Chicago police officer, a woman with calm eyes and a notebook already open. The manager led them toward Claire, speaking in a low voice, and the restaurant seemed to hold itself perfectly still, as if every candle flame had decided to listen. Grant Holloway straightened at once, rebuilding his public face piece by piece. Nolan Price smoothed his jacket and tucked the folder closer to his ribs. Derek Sloan kept his gaze lowered, no longer the man guarding a doorway, only a man waiting to learn how much truth the cameras had seen. Claire did not raise her voice. She did not point across the room. She handed the folder to the officer and said, "I was pressured to sign this after asking to leave. Several people witnessed it. I would like the security footage preserved." The officer nodded. "Did anyone prevent you from exiting?" Claire looked briefly toward Ethan, then back at the officer. "Yes." Grant stepped forward. "This is a misunderstanding between executives." Ethan, seated again beside Lily, heard the sentence and looked down at the cupcake crumbs on the plate. He had heard that kind of sentence before. Misunderstanding was often the word powerful people used when they wanted harm to sound accidental. The officer turned to Grant. "You will have a chance to explain your position." Nolan tried to speak, but Claire's attorney arrived before he could reshape the story. She was a silver-haired woman named Marjorie Wells, elegant, sharp, and breathless from rushing up 42 floors. The moment she saw Claire holding herself together beneath the warm lights, her expression softened with concern, then hardened with purpose. "Claire," she said, "are you all right?" Claire answered after a pause. "I am now." Those 3 words moved through Ethan more deeply than thanks would have. He did not look for credit. He wiped frosting from Lily's thumb with a napkin, listening as Marjorie reviewed the document and found the same trap Ethan had named. "This clause is indefensible under these circumstances," Marjorie said. Nolan's face lost the last of its color. Grant stared toward the skyline, where the city shone like 1,000 locked offices pretending to be stars. Claire watched him with a grief that had nothing to do with weakness. "I trusted you with my father's legacy," she said. Grant opened his mouth, but no worthy answer came. One by one, diners began offering their names to the manager as witnesses. A retired school principal from Evanston, a couple visiting from Milwaukee, a young server whose hands shook at first, then steadied as she spoke. Truth, once welcomed, became less lonely. Claire turned toward table 12 again. Ethan was helping Lily place the paper crown into her coat pocket so it would not bend on the ride home. The sight almost undid her. This man had stepped into a storm, then returned to fatherhood, as if fatherhood itself were the holiest calling in the room. She walked over slowly. "Lily," Claire said, kneeling just enough to meet the child's eyes with respect, "I am sorry your birthday dinner became so serious." Lily studied her with open kindness. "It is okay. Daddy says serious things matter too." Claire smiled, but her eyes glistened. "Your daddy is right." Ethan reached for the bill folder when the server placed it down, but Claire gently set her hand near it without touching him. "Please allow me." Ethan shook his head. "No, ma'am. This was her birthday." "Then let it remain hers," Claire said. "Not payment. A blessing." Ethan looked at Lily, who whispered, "Maybe blessings are allowed." For the first time that night, Ethan almost laughed. It was quiet, worn at the edges, but real. Across the room, Grant, Nolan, and Derek were escorted toward a private office to give statements, and nobody watched them with envy anymore. The beautiful room did not applaud. It simply understood. A billionaire had found her voice. A child had seen courage without cruelty, and a single father had shown everyone that dignity does not need a spotlight to change the course of a night. Claire's attorney asked for Ethan's contact information, and he gave it with the reluctance of a man who had never enjoyed being written into someone else's official record. Marjorie Wells entered his name carefully, then looked up with the kind of recognition that comes after a person realizes a stranger has just saved more than an evening. "Mr. Walker," she said, "your observation may have prevented a very serious corporate breach." Ethan slipped Lily's paper crown into the pocket of her little blue coat. "I only said what was happening. Most people saw it and said nothing." Ethan paused at that because there was no pride in being the one who stood up if the reason was that others stayed seated. Across the room, Claire signed a statement beneath the amber light while the Chicago officer waited with patient respect. She looked impossibly beautiful in that moment, not because of diamonds or wealth or the shape of her face, but because truth had stripped away the distance around her and left something honest shining through. The city beyond the glass seemed to rise behind her like a field of stars, and for the first time all evening, she did not look trapped by the empire bearing her name. She looked like she had survived it. Lily tugged gently at Ethan's sleeve. "Can we still go home on the train?" Ethan smiled. "Of course. Even from a fancy place? Especially from a fancy place. Trains do not care what kind of napkins you used." Claire heard that and turned. The smallest laugh escaped her, soft enough to be mistaken for breath, but it changed her whole face. She walked toward them as the manager returned with Ethan's bill folded inside a black leather holder. Before Ethan could reach for it, the manager said, "It has been handled, sir." Ethan looked at Claire. She raised one hand gently. The restaurant insisted. The manager nodded quickly, grateful for the mercy of that explanation. Ethan understood enough not to embarrass him. "Thank you," he said. "But next time, I pay for my daughter." Claire's eyes warmed. "Then next time I will only recommend the dessert." Lily brightened. "There can be a next time?" Ethan gave her a careful look. The look of a father who knew little hearts could build castles out of one sentence. Claire noticed and did not push. That restraint touched him more than generosity would have. "Only if your father decides the chocolate cake is worth a return trip," she said. Lily considered this seriously. It was very good, but the candles were too skinny. "That is unacceptable," Claire said with solemn grace. "I will speak to management." For a moment, 3 wounded people stood together in a dining room high above Chicago, held by something tender and almost unbelievable. Not romance, not rescue, not debt, just the clean beginning of respect. Then Marjorie called Claire back to review the security footage, and the spell softened without breaking. Claire looked at Ethan one more time. "You said earlier that no one should have to ask permission to walk away." Ethan nodded. "I meant it. Someone once taught you that." His eyes moved to Lily, then beyond her, into a past that still carried a quiet ache. "Someone paid too much for me to learn it." Claire did not ask more. Good people know when a door is not theirs to open. She only said, "I am glad you remembered tonight." Ethan helped Lily into her coat, wrapped her scarf twice because the lake wind waited below like winter with teeth, and led her toward the elevator. As they passed the private office, Grant Holloway sat inside under bright white lights, his expensive confidence reduced to paperwork and witness names. Nolan stared at his hands. Derek looked up once and met Ethan's eyes, not with challenge, but with regret. Ethan did not gloat. He simply kept walking. In the elevator, Lily leaned against his side and whispered, "Daddy, that lady looked less scared when we left." Ethan pressed the button for the lobby. Sometimes courage just needs one person to stand close enough for it to remember itself. The doors closed softly, carrying them down through 42 floors of glass, light, and second chances. By the time Ethan and Lily reached the lobby, the night had turned the marble floor into a mirror of soft lamps and passing shadows. The doorman opened the revolving door, and a clean rush of cold Chicago air swept in, carrying the smell of rain, river stone, and traffic from Michigan Avenue. Lily tucked herself closer to her father as they stepped outside. Above them, the restaurant still glowed on the 42nd floor, distant now, almost unreal, like a room in the sky where a wrong thing had been stopped before it could become permanent. Ethan buttoned Lily's coat and pulled her scarf higher. "Cold?" he asked. "A little. Train is 2 blocks. Can we walk slow?" "Always." They moved along the sidewalk beneath bare trees wrapped in tiny white lights. Cabs rolled past. Office workers hurried home. Somewhere, a street musician played a trumpet version of Amazing Grace, the notes rising gently between tall buildings as if the city itself were trying to pray. Lily held Ethan's hand with both of hers. "Did Mommy ever see you help somebody like that?" Ethan's steps slowed. He looked down at his daughter, at the face that carried Laura's eyes and his own quiet stubbornness. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago." Was she proud? The question found a tender place in him. One grief had never fully closed. "She told me being brave only matters if it makes someone else safer." Lily thought about that as they waited at the crosswalk. The signal changed. People surged forward around them, but Ethan kept her close, guiding her across with patient care. Behind them, high above the street, Claire Bennett stood near the glass wall of the Meridian room, watching the small figures below until they disappeared into the bright entrance of the station. Marjorie Wells came to her side with the recovered footage saved, witness names collected, and the first clean plan for morning already forming. "The board will need to know tonight," Marjorie said. Claire nodded. "They will. Grant and Nolan will try to spin this." "Let them try." Marjorie studied her. "You sound different." Claire kept her eyes on the city. "I almost signed away my father's work because 3 men knew exactly when I was tired." Her voice did not shake. "Then a stranger with nothing to gain reminded me I was still allowed to leave." Marjorie softened. "That kind of person is rare." Claire looked toward table 12, now cleared except for a faint circle where Lily's cupcake plate had rested. "No," she said quietly. "That kind of person is easy to miss." The next morning, Bennett Meridian Group released a formal statement announcing an internal investigation, the suspension of Grant Holloway and Nolan Price pending review, in full cooperation with authorities. No dramatic language, no revenge, just order returning to a place where deception had tried to settle in. By noon, employees who had been afraid to speak began forwarding messages, records, and old concerns to Marjorie's office. By sunset, Claire had learned that courage does not only expose one lie. It invites every buried truth to step into the light. 3 days later, Ethan came home from a carpentry job to find an envelope tucked beneath the windshield wiper of his old pickup. Inside was a handwritten note on simple cream paper. It said, "Mr. Walker, you told me to make sure they never did it to anyone else. We have started. Thank you for standing without needing to be seen. Claire Bennett." Beneath the note was no check, no reward, no attempt to buy the moment back. Only a small gift card to the Meridian room, with a line written at the bottom, "For Lily's next birthday," with proper candles. Ethan stood in the driveway while the evening light rested on the hood of the truck. Lily read the note twice, then hugged it to her chest. "Can we go back someday?" she asked. Ethan looked at the sky, where the first stars were appearing over their modest street. "Someday," he said, "but not because she is rich." Lily smiled. "Because she is not scared anymore." Ethan's eyes grew warm. "Because kindness should always have a way to come back." And somewhere high above downtown Chicago, Claire Bennett sat alone in her office, not lonely this time, with the city shining around her and a new rule written in her heart. Power without dignity is only noise, but quiet goodness can walk into a room, say the truth, and leave the whole world silent.